Welcome to our Team Jaeger REDSHORT panel presentation. Our Team Jaeger is our underground cyber collection and analysis team. This month we're going to be highlighting the Maritime Resilience. And we're going to be talking with Daniel Ng, who's the CEO of Cyber Owl, and Jonathan Sweeney, who's with our Red Sky Alliance. Dan, John, welcome. Hey Dan, if you could tell us a little bit about Cyber Owl, then a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sounds good. Hi, Bill. Hi, John. So I'm Dan. I'm CEO of Cyber Owl, and Cyber Owl is a maritime cybersecurity business. We really specialize in security monitoring and analytics. So this is all about getting the data and the evidence to help the fleet operator to visualize the cyber risks on their shipboard systems.
Good. And John, a little bit about the Red Sky Alliance and WAPAC Labs.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Jonathan Sweeney. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at Red Sky Alliance. Red Sky Alliance is essentially a cyber threat intelligence company. We've worked in all different industries, but specifically, I've had a recent focus in the maritime threat intelligence industry as well. So just kind of monitoring different threats that different shipping companies in the shipping industry overall might see.
Well, good. So today we're going to have a short discussion on maritime resilience, focusing in on the cyber aspect of the maritime world. And within the last 2 weeks, there was a ship, an evergreen ship that ran aground in the Suez Canal. And there had been some speculation that the power and the navigation systems of that ship were affected. They're still investigating it, but I know John and I have talked that, what if that was a cyber incident? What if that factored into it? And we know that Dan, has done a lot of work with in the maritime world, and that's why we invited him on for this month's talk to discuss maybe some of the aspects of cybersecurity and how they deal with not only the ships but the ports and the power and navigation systems thereof. So with that, I'll pass it to the two smart people here, John and Dan. I'll pass it to you guys.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so just to give everyone a background who's unfamiliar with the incident, essentially a skyscraper-sized vessel, the Evergreen MV Ever Given, was stuck in the Suez Canal for about 6 days there. And that canal, the Suez Canal, is responsible for about 12% of global trade every day. So it was a pretty huge impact. And like Bill said, we have no indication at this point saying that there was a cyber attack involved. But the idea is clear that if someone were to impact that canal, either intentionally or unintentionally, the consequences are essentially the same. So Dan, I'm just curious to kind of pick your brain a little bit about how an operation through the Suez Canal, just kind of the standard security, both at the canal level and also the ships passing through. If you could just kind of talk about some of the security measures that may be in place.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can speak more, I guess, to the kind of the cyber side of things than the physical security. But the Suez Canal is one of a number of what you'd call choke points around the world. And so these are very narrow or risky points in the shipping lanes globally that really quite a lot of shipping traffic kind of goes through. And why they're interesting is because any incident that takes place, very close to this choke point, and they happen relatively regularly, has a lot of fallout implication, because it's not just the vessel itself that suffers a kind of loss, but actually it then holds up a huge queue of other sort of vessels. So in the Suez Canal blockage, we had something around 300 vessels that were just waiting to pass through because the Ever Given had just sort of blocked up a very important choke point within the Suez Canal. And it makes it very difficult for many of the fleet operators to make quick decisions around what to do next, because it's a gamble, right? You're sitting there thinking, what if I wait for another day or 2 days? They might clear this up, and I will then save a significant amount instead of having to go right around Africa to make that same journey. So I'll wait for a day, then you wait for another day, and then 6 days later, you're kind of still waiting, and you've got to make some quick decisions around that. Never mind the fuel, never mind the timing implications. So this is going to be a multi-hundred million loss, I think, to the sector, and will have lots of trickling effects down the whole supply chain.
Yeah, and I mean, it has a pretty big impact on Egypt as a country. I know, as the country that's running the canal, they're going to be financially impacted pretty significantly as well. So, again, not necessarily an attack in this case. We have no evidence of that, but the impacts are the same. So, they're currently working out a negotiation or a settlement with Evergreen over this. But can you talk about maybe some of the impacts that come from incidents in the maritime industry, or having these types of incidents?
Yeah, for me, this event is interesting for two reasons. One is, as unfortunate as it is, but it's interesting for two reasons. One is, as a business, we've been working with businesses, trying to get them to run drills of what the sector will call a black swan event. And so you get a lot of people going, oh, this is never going to happen. But to humor you, we'll just sort of do it anyway.
Right.
And let's do a risk assessment off the back of it. And the point we always get across is, look, it's not about, this definitely happening. It's about understanding what risks and what losses can come out of something like this happening, and then having a very grown-up conversation about which of those risks you're willing to bear. If not, which ones you need to create mitigations around, right? That's the whole art of risk assessment. But what we have now is an event that has actually taken place. Okay, so it's not related, or we don't know that it's related to a cyber event, right, but it's now taken place. And I think it really brings to life the potential losses that could come out of something like a power system on board the vessel failing just at the wrong moment.
Right.
The second reason why I think this could be quite interesting is I wonder how many threat actors look at this and go, haha, and you can almost see a light bulb go off in their head.
Exactly.
I don't know, you guys will see a lot more of this potentially than we do, but we've seen a small increase, not in the shipping sector, but wider, of extortion-based threats. So, I'll do a little sort of teaser attack on your system, and then I'll drop you a note to say, if you don't pay up, I'm just going to keep doing this ad nauseum, ad infinitum. And it's interesting, something like this, because shipping often thinks, oh, my vessels are not particularly connected. Right. They spend most of their time out in blue ocean. They don't fall out of the sky like a plane. What's the problem? And I think, I'd hate to say this, but I suspect threat actors are looking at this going, there's an interesting set of impacts we could create here if we were creative.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I want to go back to something you mentioned a little bit earlier. So, the Suez Canal has been open since 1869, right? So the idea of a canal blockage happening in the next 100 or 150 years, like at some point somebody had to think, maybe the canal will get blocked at some point, whether it's a natural disaster or, an incident or an actual attack, an intentional issue. So I guess my question would be, what are some of the ways that a canal like that could be resilient, or some of the steps that they could take to prepare for an event? And I guess I would ask why those steps weren't in place, or what, in other words, what failed to make this happen? I mean, somebody had to have said at some point, maybe this canal will be blocked. But at this, the response to this was essentially, let's go out and dig it up with some excavating equipment and some tugboats. So I'm just curious to, get a better understanding of what resilience might look like at those kind of places.
Right. So, I mean, look, there's with these choke points, there's a whole bunch of sort of physical things one can put in place. And, these are great, hulking, huge bits of infrastructure, and, lots of complicated decisions go into deciding whether to upgrade that infrastructure, when to upgrade it, when is it too big, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm certainly no expert in that side of things. From a kind of a vessel passing through that, to an extent, you are subject and a beneficiary of all that kind of planning on the kind of canal side and the resilience on that side. But you can certainly do your bit to try to work out whether your systems are resilient or not, so that you don't end up being sort of stuck in one of those choke points. And Suez Canal is just one example of these. There are quite a few other choke points. And so, there is this common shipboard systems are hard to get to, right? You've got to bring the ship into port or into dry dock sometimes to actually upgrade it, to patch it, to do something different to it. So it can be very easy to sort of fall into this mindset of, oh, it's too hard, we'll just live with those vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And many a times when the ship comes into port or comes into a dry dock, what's driving that decision is about an equipment replacement, right? Or some kind of maintenance event. Mm-hmm. Very, 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 very few fleet operators programmatically put in a decision point to say, right, what can we do about vulnerability and cyber resilience whilst we have that ship in dry dock? And so we've been kind of driving a campaign with some of the fleet operators we work with to say, look, when you're going to bring a ship into dry dock, and when you're going to do a change management event, make sure you put in your processes and make sure you write it into your policies and follow that, to consult the IT team or consult the cyber team to say, right, given we've got the ship captive in the dry dock, what can we do to deal with some of those vulnerabilities so that at least it can create a step change in the resilience of that vessel? I think we need to do more of that kind of thinking as a sector.
Great. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So again, the sort of investigation stage is still taking place, and we don't know a whole lot about what happened, other than there was obviously some wind, and the vessel was unable to navigate through that. So doing some sort of, my perspective is cyber, but looking back, I mean, and I believe it was in 2013, there was some students at the University of Texas in Austin who were able to alter the AIS and ECDIS on a vessel to steer it off course, basically to change the navigation of the vessel, and they were successful in doing so. Now, to do that for a vessel the size of a skyscraper, I'm sure is extremely difficult, and I'm sure that there are plenty of resources that would be needed. And probably the University of Texas student. No, okay, all right. Well, I guess I want to learn more about that. I mean, what kind of resources would be required to, if kids at University of Texas Austin can do this, what kind of resources would be required to move a vessel this size?
Look, many of those systems are used in these huge vessels that are used in these huge vessels are very, very similar to those on a yacht or a super yacht. Okay, maybe not like a 6-person leisure boat, but one of the larger super yachts, which I think is the exercise that you're referring to.
Oh wow! Okay.
In some ways, some of the super yachts actually have more sophisticated systems, actually, because they are looking at doing more complicated maneuvers in more complicated waters, whereas most of commercial shipping actually go up and down the same routes all the time.
Yeah.
And yes, some ports and some harbors are very complicated maneuvers, but most of the time they're sort of doing the same route. So no, the answer is it's not necessarily. In fact, it probably isn't. In fact, it might be the opposite. More difficult to do it on a large commercial vessel. But the other kind of part to this is that I think why this event is particularly interesting is because shipping always tells you, we're not a plane, so we can't fall out. A ship can't fall out of the sky. So the risk is actually fairly limited, right? We don't. That's what they say. I don't agree, but that's what you'll often hear them saying.
Yeah.
We're not worried about confidentiality because the worst case is that you might lose a little bit of detail around what cargo you're carrying. Again, we can debate that. We are very worried about availability, but we're not worried about availability from a cybersecurity standpoint, because if a cyber attack takes place and the system fails, then we'll see it fail, and then we'll go back to manual processes, and shipping has loads of manual processes.
Right.
But in that kind of CIA model, shipping always forgets integrity. What about integrity? What happens when you're in this really narrow a piece of water and you have to make a complicated maneuver and there's a sandstorm, you can't see out the window, and you have to rely on your instruments,
Right.
and you have to rely on the power system working really, really well. In this case, it sounds like it was probably a power system. Well, then you're completely reliant on your user interface, on your human-machine interface.
Yeah.
You're completely reliant on those readings, and if there's an integrity error, then it's not too hard to imagine ending up in a similar situation.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I was talking to Bill this morning, and we were kind of, again, I'm a cyber, I like to think I'm cyber focused, which maritime is definitely not my key strength. But I was curious, wasn't there somebody outstanding on the bow of the ship saying like, hey, the ship's veering off course, maybe we should do something about it? Or we were also talking about other ships that collide with each other because they quote unquote didn't see each other. But it's like, didn't somebody go to the bow of the ship and say like, hey, there's a giant vessel coming at us, maybe we should like navigate off course? So yeah, I think that's really interesting. So I'm curious as to, we know now that sort of the precedent is set, right? I mean, it's been over 150 years now, and nothing, no terrorists were inspired, no cyber threat actors were inspired, and now all of a sudden they've got an event to see like, hey, if I block the Suez Canal, I can cause major disruptions to, either specific countries like Egypt or sort of general disruption to the market, where we saw over 350 ships were unable to pass through. So I'm curious to think of, obviously not like speculate, but just to get kind of an idea of how likely you think maybe a cyber attack that could result in the same kind of damage, the likelihood of that occurring.
So there are two levels to your question.
Okay.
I think the likelihood of a compromise to the vessel, and then a likelihood of the compromise to the vessel when it's just in the wrong place.
Right.
Right. So let me take each one of those in turn, and there's a lot of speculation here, and we just got to be really careful with that. Now,
Yeah.
I go back to the point we spoke a few minutes ago. The likelihood of compromising a system on the vessel, it's relatively easy to do.
Okay.
And I think time and time again, whether through a penetration test or whether through actually, kind of events that have taken place, it's proven that it's actually relatively easy to do. And shipping is just not as secure as some other sectors out there, and there's still a lot of work to do. So the more interesting question in some ways, the second one, which is how easy it is to do that at just the wrong moment. Now, you may know this, you may not. It's relatively easy to know where a vessel is, because we've got AIS systems now that tell you where a vessel is. And it's relatively easy to see where the vessel's headed, because that forms part of that reporting process. So if you were malicious, if you were paid off to do it, or if you were just bored, and you wanted to create an effect like that, actually tying those two bits of intelligence together in terms of how do I penetrate the vessel and where is the vessel headed isn't too difficult. Now, I must caveat that. Let's be clear. It still needs the perfect storm of a number of things that happen at all the wrong moments at the same time. But it's not hard to imagine recreating something like this.
Okay, great. So I guess I never want to finish on a negative note, but looking at the time here, I'd like to know kind of, at Cyber Owl, what are you guys doing to keep people safe? And what are you guys doing over there to sort of help avoid these types of problems?
It's about preempting the problem. So what we try to do is we use data and evidence to say, hey, look, all your back doors are open, or there are these 4 significant back doors that are open. And you can't do everything, but if you start with the basics of these four, and here's the data to show you that they are open, then actually you are significantly less likely to be compromised than the next vessel or third vessel.
Yeah.
So most of what we do is that proactive part of it. So we call it pre-incident, to say, look, these are your top risks, and here's the data and the evidence to show it. And actually, we can also see near misses happening all the time. Please go do something about it. And that's essentially the whole ethos of what we try to do.
Excellent. Well, with that, Dan, I want to say thank you for our conversation today, and I'll go ahead and pass it back to Bill. But thank you.
Yeah, Dan and John, a fascinating discussion here. We're talking millions of dollars in lost revenue all along the transportation supply line. With what you were talking about, can be easily disrupted. And I think the maritime industry, as with a lot of different sectors, need to, I think, smarten up with their cybersecurity posture and understand that, you have cyber, you have the human element, you have physical security, and it all needs to be, coordinated together. So we don't have incidents like what happened in the Suez Canal, whether that was an accident or malicious. The bottom line was a lot of money was lost because of that incident. So with that, I want to thank you again for coming in from over in the UK, and I hope everything's going well over there. Stay safe, and thanks for everyone that attended here today, and we'll see you soon.